Hi, my name is Bob and welcome to the homestead, y'all. Well, this video is going to be part 2 of our DIY solar tracker. We finished it up yesterday. It's working great. Been testing it all morning this morning. You can see it's working right now. We're partly cloudy, but it's moving with the sun this morning. But in this video, we're going to be talking about hooking the linear actuator up, wiring in our combiner box, wiring our tracker controller and our sensor, mounting the solar panels, and wiring in the solar panels to our combiner box. So this should finish everything up. Hopefully it'll be everything that you need, the video will, to build your own solar tracker. Okay, now we have it all the way into our west position, so I'll grab the camera and I'll show you where the cam's at. Here's our west position. This is our west position cam. The bottom cam is right here, and it's hitting this bottom limit switch, and you can see there's the high of the cam, and the high of the cam is hitting the limit switch, so that's as far west as it's going to go. Now, if you wanted this to go further west, then you would have to come up to your linear actuator and take the bolt out of the top and actually spin the linear actuator inside itself to either pull it in or pull it out and then put your bolt back in. But once this cam hits this limit switch, then your linear actuator is going to quit. So that's as far west as it can go. Now, if you move it all the way to your west position, your cam hits the limit switch and it's still not where you want it. If your west limit switch is not adjustable, then what you'll have to do is take this bolt out and spin the tip of your linear actuator either in or out, depending on how much further you want it to go. So if you wanted it, if it was tilted too far, then you would take this out and you'd spin this out and then put your bolt back in, and then that's where it would stop when it hit the limit switch. If it's not coming far enough, you would take this bolt out and spin this shaft in. Now, if you do that and you still don't have enough, then you're going to have to loosen your bolts and you're going to have to slide your linear actuator forward or backward, depending on how far you want it to come to the west. That's how you adjust it after your limit switch. Now that we have our west limit switch set for our linear actuator, it's time to set our east limit switch back. So move your tracker all the way to the east, as far as you want it, and then we'll go in here and we'll move the limit switch. I've got mine set already, but I'm going to show you how to set it. Mine just kicked off just now, so you can see it's tilted all the way to the east. So in the morning, in the winter time, when the sun comes up in the east over here, our tracker is going to be at home position, be ready to accept the sun the next morning. So I'll grab the camera, we'll look right here, and I'll show you how to set that limit switch. Set your east limit switch. You just take this screw out and you move your cam to where that switch triggers. See, ours, the cam is right here, right on the edge of it, so that's why it shut it off. Screw, and I turn that counterclockwise and get it off this limit switch. Of course, this bottom one down here, this cam here, is our west limit switch, and we already set that. So you just loosen that screw. Now, some of these are a little bit different. Some of them are slotted, and it'll have 2 Allen screws or 2 set screws on it, and you just loosen those and then move this cam to where you want it. This one has a Phillips screw in the middle, and it has little teeth that lock into the bottom cam for your west cam. So you have to loosen it and turn it and then push it back in those teeth. But it's real easy to set. Just when the cam hits the limit switch, then that's where it's going to shut it off, and it's going to send a signal through your wires back to your controller. Or if your linear actuator doesn't have the limit switch wires, that's fine. It's going to sit here and it's going to wait, and it'll pick up the sun in the morning whenever the sun comes up. It's time to build our combiner box. What I have here is a 12-inch by 12-inch, or inside of your box is 12 inches by 12 inches by 6 inches deep. Okay? Now, when you're building your combiner box, you want to make sure that you use a waterproof box. Make sure that you follow NEC codes. It needs to be waterproof, rainproof for use outside, because this is going to be either attached to the bottom of your solar tracker, or if you put 2 4x4s in the ground with a couple pieces of unistrut mounted, it's still going to be exposed to the weather. So this is a box that I had. It's a perfect size. let's talk about the layout of your combiner box. Now this is a plastic box. And I put my den rail in with just some self-tapping screws. They're short screws, so that way they don't stick out the back of the box. If you have a metal box, you'll have a back plane. If you don't have a back plane, then you can make one out of a piece of sheet metal. But since this is a plastic box, I use short screws. I have 3 pieces of den rail, and then I have my little bus bar for our negative. And then you can see where I have the strain reliefs coming in. This is our piece of 1-inch conduit that's going back to our battery box inside the shop. And then this strain relief on this side over here will be for the linear actuator. So you can see I'm going to have 3 panels, so I have 3 positive coming in and 3 negative coming in. And then this extra one here is for the sensor for the solar tracker, which this is the sensor that comes with the solar tracker. So the wire for it will be coming in there. I like doing them all on the bottom if I can. You can do them on the sides as long as you put a little silicone. In fact, I'll put a little silicone around each one of these, even though they're on the bottom. So let's talk about the layout a minute of each thing and why I laid it out the way I did. This first top piece of den rail, for this first one, is for our breakers. Now I'm using 15 amp breakers, so you'll need to use the correct breakers depending on the panels that you're using. And then I have a combiner that this goes in the top of all 3 of those and combines them right down to a single wire. So you can see right there. So what I like to do is I like to put this on first, just because it's easier to put it on outside of the box. So I'll slide all that in real quick, and we'll put the combiner in all 3 of these breakers. So what I like to do is just do them one at a time. Just put that one in. Now you need to make sure that you get it inside the clip. So it'll go inside there, and then you just take a screwdriver and tighten it up. So this is our 3 breakers. These will be our 3 positives coming in from your solar panels. So you'll have 3 positives coming in, 1, 2, 3. 3 negatives coming in, 1, 2, 3. So that'll be your panels. They're all combined at the top. This set screw right up here will be your wire that goes back in, comes down through our conduit, which we already have in place. But this wire will come up, it'll come over, and it'll hook right there. So that'll be our positive going back into our battery bank. And then we'll have another wire coming out of this conduit that'll go into your bus bar here. This is your negative bus bar. We'll have a wire coming in that goes back to your battery bank. Okay, so that has our solar panel side. Of course, we'll also have a ground in here. So we'll put a ground in here. So this is our combiner. This is where your positive will hook up from all 3 solar panels and go down, go to your charge controller and your battery bank. And of course, this is your negative bus bar. That'll do the same. Okay, now we need to mount the solar controller. So let me pull these tabs back out and I'll show you. This one is, there we go. So this is your positive and negative for your charge controller. Now that's your power for it. And it says power input DC 12 volt or 24 volt. This is your output to your motor. So this is where your linear actuator is going to hook up. Okay. This is your power switch, and that's a backlight. Those 2 little buttons right there, there and there. On this side, you have your limit switch, east and west, your anemometer if you have one on it, which we don't, and your light sensor. That's this sensor that comes with your tracker, your controller. It's this sensor here. So these wires will hook up on your light sensor. So we're going to mount him on this top den rail, push him down, and then we'll lock the 2 tabs in. Okay, so that it has him mounted. This is your charge controller. Okay, you can see it has a solar panel positive and negative. That'll come from our 24 volt solar panels. Has a battery positive and negative. That'll go to our 2 small batteries that we're going to put inside here. Put them in series. That'll be 24 volts. And then it has a light bulb, which is your load, which will be your actual axis controller, your tracker controller. So I'm going to mount it right down here on this piece of den rail. Get him mounted. And push the tab up. Oh, didn't slide on. So we'll mount our charge controller here, push the bottom tab up. That should lock it in place, and it does. Now we'll get some wire, and we'll go ahead and wire up our load from our charge controller, which is going to be our tracker controller. And we'll go ahead and wire up our solar panel on this, which is actually whatever you're using to charge it, which we're going to be using the solar panels on the tracker to charge it. And then we're going to be putting a fuse link in between. This is just an automotive fuse link. Since this is a 10 amp charge controller, we'll put a 10 amp fuse in here. This needs to be cut and stripped, but this is what we'll use to run our positive over to our positive on our charge controller, and we'll put us a 10 amp fuse inside there. So this has our positive with a fuse link and our negative going to the solar panel side of our charge controller. Now I'm using 10 gauge wire, so this is a 10 amp charge controller, so it'll handle that many amps, especially shorter distance, but you need to use the appropriate wire size. There's all kinds of wire charts on the internet to see the appropriate wire size for how many amps you're using. This is stranded 10 gauge wire. Now this is 8 gauge wire, that's just what came with the fuse link, and then I'm using 10 gauge here. I generally don't use two different sizes. If I use 8 gauge here, I always use 8 gauge there, but this is what I have on hand. It'll handle the amps no problem. But if you use 8 gauge here and you have 8 gauge wire, I would go ahead and use the 8 gauge wire on this. Okay, so that has our power coming into the solar for the controller, the charge controller. Now we need to go ahead and run power, positive and negative, to the load side of the charge controller up to our solar tracker controller. Okay, I'll tidy this up a little bit once we mount it. Get a couple zip ties in there to hold everything together, hold it out of the way. But that has our load side from our charge controller going to our solar tracker controller. Positive and negative go into that. So that has that done. But one thing I did want to mention, anytime I'm dealing with copper wiring, after I tighten it up to the recommended foot-pounds, I always wait 10 or 15 minutes and then come back and tighten it again, because copper compresses slowly. So after you tighten it up, that copper's still compressing inside there for a few minutes, and if you wait 10 or 15 minutes, you can usually get another 1/4 to an 1/8 inch turn on it to make sure you get a good connection. Because if you leave any of these connections on any of these loose, it's going to arc and you're going to pull amperages, and you're going to either start a fire or you're going to flip your breakers or blow a fuse. So that's just a tip. Anytime you're dealing with it, doesn't matter if it's AC or if it's DC, after you tighten the copper up, especially if it's stranded wire. Now on AC you should be using solid core wire, but solid core will do the same thing on 110. If you're dealing with higher voltages, you're going to be using stranded wire on your 240s and your 480s and all the way up to 600 volts. So you want to come back, you want to check them, tighten them to the correct foot-pounds, and then come back about 15 to 20 minutes later and tighten them again, because you'll get a little bit more out of it. Okay, but that has everything that we can do right now. So let's go ahead, we'll go over and we're going to mount this on the tracker. Okay, we have our box mounted. This was my original conduit. My lines go into my charge controller and battery bank. This is the positive side. You can see, even though it's a white wire, I have it marked with red tape, and this was the negative side. So now it's time to hook up our light sensor for our solar tracker controller. I have the wire ran in here, and I'll show you in a minute. I have the light sensor just clamped to the tracker. So that way we can wire this up. We'll go ahead and hook a battery up to it, and we'll test it before we put our solar panels on. So to test this, what we need to do is we need to wire up our light sensor. You can see an E, a negative, and a W, which is east and west and negative. On the sensor itself, it has a little label, says green negative, yellow west, red east. Also in the manual, right here under wiring the light sensor, which I'll try to focus this and see if you can focus on it. So if we look in our manual, wiring the light sensor, it says the red wire is connected to E, the yellow wire is connected to W, and the green wire is connected to negative. And then it says the same thing, of course, right here. So that's what we want to do. You want to get you a small tip screwdriver, because these are very small. So we'll start on this far side, the W. So that's going to be the yellow wire. So we'll get our yellow wire. Now these are tinned already, so they already tin the ends of them for you. And then we'll start connecting it in order. So we'll do yellow, green, and red. So I'm going to get these wires in the correct position. I'm going to try to slide them in all at once. And then we'll tighten them all three. Okay, and always pull on your wires to make sure that they're in there well. Okay, that has our charge controller wire. I think I'm going to run it just like that. We'll get us some sticky tabs and some zip ties, and we'll sticky tab and zip tie that back just like that. But for now, we'll go ahead and test this. I can go ahead and hook the batteries up. We'll hook them up right here. That'll give us power to our charge controller. We have our light sensor hooked up here. I have the light sensor clamped to the solar tracker. We're partly cloudy today, but we should still be able to test our solar tracker. So let me get the batteries, we'll hook them up, and we'll run some tests. All right, let's test it and see how it does. Showing it going west now, which is correct. Should be going west. Should be stopping soon. Yep, and there it goes. Okay, it seems like it's working well. Have everything wired up. Let me show you in the combiner box here. Okay, this is inside the combiner box. I have our batteries. I have them sitting on the ground because I didn't want to block this. When they're in here, they block it, so I just took a piece of wire, run two battery connectors, your positive and negative. You can see our load is going up to our controller and it's running. Our solar tracker controller is running. This is our sensor coming in, and this is our linear actuator right here coming in. Now I don't have all the wires tidied up. We'll do that in a little bit. I just wanted to check the controller to make sure it's working correctly, and it is. It seems like it is. It's partly cloudy today. It stopped on its own, pretty close to exactly where it needed to be. I'll go ahead and I'll run it all the way east. We'll run it all the way west. We'll check it one more time, and if that works, then we'll go ahead and mount our solar panels, and then we'll wire our solar panels in here. So we'll wire our 3 positives and our 3 negatives. This is going to our charge controller, positive and negative going back to our charge controller inside and our battery bank. So our 6 strain reliefs here will be positive and negative for all 3 of our panels. But right now everything looks like it's working correctly. The solar tracker controller is working correctly. So let's go ahead and we'll get the panels on, we'll get them wired up, we'll get everything tidied up, and then we'll test it one last time if we can get this done before dark. I just wanted to show you this real quick. I just clamped this light sensor on here to test it. It really doesn't matter where you clamp these sensors, where you put them. What does matter is it has a little arrow that says east on here. You want to make sure that's facing east whenever you mount it. Now what we're going to do is we're going to make us a little bracket for this, and we're going to mount it at the top of the panels, and the bracket will stick out. But I don't make that bracket until after I get my panels mounted, and then I'll measure the length, because I want this to stick up about 6 inches above the panels. As far, when I say up, above the panels, not up this way, but above them. So that way the panels won't affect the light, and it'll do a better job at tracking. But I just wanted to show you that. I just clamped it on here for right now, just to test the controller to make sure everything was working properly. To mount our solar panels on, I'm going to go ahead and take our north-south adjustment off, and then I'm going to lay this back flat. I'll adjust it flat so that way it's easier to mount our solar panels on it. So we'll just take that off real quick. Run this nut down and bring it down lower. And get the right direction. There we go. Now you don't have to take this off. You can leave it right on here just fine. Spin him down if you'd like. Either way, if you take it off, just hold it with your hand. It's just a little more comfortable for me to take it off and turn it. But I want to get this pretty flat to where the panels don't try to slide off on me. Okay, that should do it. Doesn't have to be perfect. Still tilted just a little bit, but that's fine. Now I can mount my panels. I'll start with the middle one, and I'll put it in the center as best I can. So that should be good. We're all the way down against our nut. Move that down a little more in case I need to adjust it a little more once I get a panel on there. Now we can get our solar panels, and let's go ahead and get them mounted. Time to mount our solar panels on now. I'm using stainless steel bolts with stainless steel washers and lock nuts, but you don't have to. There's dozens of ways you can mount these on here. You could use Z brackets, you could use aluminum brackets, you can use all kinds of stuff. I am going to use on the bottom side, I have some 5/16 all thread that I'm going to use with a threaded clamp on the end of it. You can see that's threaded and it's got teeth on the end of it, and I'll use these on the bottom side. Or you could just drill out your solar panel the back side, make new holes wherever these holes line up, and you can mount, just use bolts on all of it. So really it's up to you whether you want to use clamps, whether you want to use bolts, whether you want to use all thread with a clamp on it, or even nuts with a big washer on them. You can use anything you want, depending on how much wind you get in your area will really determine on how you need to mount these. But there's several ways to mount them, and like I said, if you're going to try to drill your solar panel, the back of it out to line up with some of these holes, be very careful that you don't go all the way through when you're drilling out the frame and hit the back of your solar panels, because you could crack it. So you have to be careful with that. So that's one of the reasons I use a clamp on the bottom side, because I know the holes aren't going to line up. So I'll use a piece of all thread and I'll run it through here, and then I'll spin this down and then tighten it from the bottom to tighten that down to clamp. And plus I can do two at once. This clamp is long enough and wide enough. Once I get that through the gap of two panels, I can pull that down, and that gets two panels at one time. But as far as mounting your panels on your tracker, that's entirely up to you. Just make sure you use lock nuts or lock washers on it, because over the year, as time goes by, your panel will vibrate with the wind and your nuts will come loose. So make sure that you use some kind of lock nut or lock washer, or even Loctite if you just use a regular nut. But how you do it's entirely up to you. So now, let's go ahead and get this panel up there, get it centered up, and we'll go ahead and mount this first panel. Go ahead and get one bolt in this, but then I'm going to flatten this a little bit more. It's wanting to slide on me. I'll show you what I did here in just a minute. Make sure I had it centered. Well, I have a couple of clamps here. I'm going to go ahead and put a clamp on this side just to hold it, because we do have a slight breeze blowing today. I want to make sure it doesn't come off on me. Gotta watch this bracket down here. I know it's going to be close. According to my measurements, it should be clear, and it is. Alright, so now what we'll do is we'll get the next panel up, and like I said, I'll use these pieces of all thread, and I'll clamp the bottom of both of these. So this piece of all thread will go in here, it'll go in through there, and it'll clamp both of these solar panels together. What I did is I centered this solar panel on this rack and made me two marks, one at the top and one at the bottom, so that way I know I have them square. So if you measure from the end of this in and the end of that one in, then they should be identical, so that way they're square onto your tracker. Of course, when you put your next one on this end and your other one on the other end, you'll get the same distance and do the exact same thing. But what I do is I just use the ends of the unistrut, and the outside ones I just mount them on the very edge and flush it on the edge of it, so I know that that's square to the solar tracker then. Alright, well, it looks like this is going to be good to go on both sides. Like I said, we'll use this all thread and these clamps. This will go on each side. And these clamps are wide enough that it will catch both solar panels. Now I'm just going to finger tighten that one, because when I go to put this solar panel up, I want to make sure I can loosen it just by hand. Now I'll get a socket and a wrench, and we'll go ahead and tighten this bolt up, put the other bolt in this other side, and tighten it up, and then we'll get the next panel up. Okay, so this is the top bolt. It's going through the unistrut, going through the original hole in the frame. You're going to have 6 holes in your frame, 2 at the top, 2 at the bottom, then 2 in the middle, and that's for your ground wire. The 2 in the middle are. So that's where your ground, that's where we'll ground our panels at with a solid number 6 solid core wire. So you can see I have stainless steel bolt in here. It's a 3/8 bolt. by 2 inches going through. I have a nut, a lock nut, and a washer on the top, and then 2 washers here with the bolt, and I have it tightened up the same as on the other side on the top. And then the bottom, like I said, we're going to use the all thread, but once I get the second panel up there, I'll show you how that works. One bolt here, put a washer on it, and a lock nut. And these are 3/8/16 bolts. Yeah. There's my nut. I'm gonna take my glove off. Like I said before, you can mount these any way you want. One thing I like to do is get my 2 bolts in before I tighten them up. So that way if I need to move the solar panel around a little bit, I have a little bit of wiggle room. I'm going to unclamp this one, get it out of my way. Go ahead and just put it down here on the bottom. Like I said before, just because it's a little bit windy out today, I don't want the wind taking the panel off on me. We'll do this in the same way. Okay, that has them in right now. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to check this space right here, which looking at it, just eyeballing it, it looks perfect to me. But I'm going to check it just to make sure. Yeah, it's exactly 1 inch and exactly 1 inch. Well, 15/16, so I could move it just a hair before I tighten these up. So let's check it again. Okay, just a hair more. Okay. Okay, that's got the space evened out. Now we need to check the end here. It's 3/8 of an inch. 3/8 of an inch. So we're good. So I'm going to go ahead and tighten these up now. Tighten the 2 top ones up. And now that we have this one in, we can go ahead and put our piece of all thread down there. Now on this end, there's not enough room to get another piece of all thread beside this. Yeah, there might be enough room. We'll see. If there's enough room, I'll go ahead and put a piece of all thread. If not, then I'll go ahead and drill it out. I have some room to move it that way. What I think I'll do is check that first. Yeah, I could move it over a little. I think I'm going to move it over a little just to make the difference for this piece of all thread. That way I don't have to worry about it any. I can take and lock it down real easy. So we'll move about an 1/8 and an 1/8. Now let's see. I have enough room. Yes. We have plenty of room there now. We still have enough room here. So I'm going to go ahead and clamp this down where it is. And then tighten our bolts up. Okay, that should keep the bottom from moving. So now we can tighten our top bolts. Okay, I do want to check the gap one last time. Just to make sure it's square. Needs to go a little bit more. Okay, I think that has us. That's as far as I can go that way anyhow. Alright. Okay. Now, told you I'd show you how this worked. I'm going to use this piece of all thread with a nut on it. So what we'll do is we'll go down here in the middle and I'll show you that. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and put this clamp on here. Piece of all thread goes through. And then we're going to clamp this right on the edge. You don't want your clamp touching the glass on your solar panel. So what we're going to do is put it right on the edge and then we're going to tighten it up. Now I'm going to get the ladder and look at this to make sure that it's not touching the glass. I can see it's not. It's on the edge, so that's exactly what we want. I'm going to tighten this down just a little bit more. And that has us. That can't go anywhere. This part always worries me because I've busted the glass on my solar panels before using clamps like this. But If you don't want to use clamps, then you can always come in here and drill a hole in your frame on the bottom. Like I said, just be very careful. Drill a small hole first, and then keep getting your drill bits, go to the next size bigger and the next size bigger, and do it slowly. So that way your drill bit doesn't grab and go all the way up and hit the glass on the back of your panel. It'll hit the solar cells and it'll crack. Want to do the same thing with this one. Want to make sure we stay on the edge of the frame here and not the glass. You want to stay on the frame and tighten it up. Let me get my wrench. So I'm going to hold this in place while I tighten this clamp up. I don't want it to spin. Of course, if you chose to bolt yours on from underneath, then you don't have to worry about that. Or if you use a Z-clamp, you'll have to do something a little different. But that's got this outside panel and the inside, the center one. So now we just need to get the last outside one on. We have our panels wired up, so let me just show you what we have. These are our 3 negative coming in from the 3 solar panels. These are the 3 positive coming in from the solar panels. Now you can see on all my positives I have red electrical tape on them, and I do that on both ends. I do it on this end, I'll put a red electrical tape on it, and the end that connects to the solar panel, the MC4 connector, and that way it just makes it easier for me. It's a quick reference, so I know that that's positive when I'm hooking them up to the MC4. And then the negative I just leave black. Now one thing, when you use the cable that you use for this, make sure you get solar cable, because it's UV resistant, water resistant, oil resistant. They make special cables. This is 10 gauge wire, has a real thick insulation on it, so you want to make sure you use the correct wire. Don't just use regular old wire like your THN wire. You don't want to use that, because this is exposed to the weather, so you want to make sure that you use a good weatherproof wire, and like I said, solar wire. And then once you tighten these connections, you want to come back about 15 minutes later, and you can get just a little bit more as the copper compresses on all these. Same with these connections. Wait 10 or 15 minutes and come back and torque them a little bit more. So you can see now we have our 3 positive coming from the solar panels coming in, and the 3 negatives coming in. So if we take a meter and we check that, and luckily the sun just came out, so we should get just about full voltage. Now these are 24 volt panels, so we should get around 34 volts somewhere in there out of them. 34.8, 34.8, 34.8. Now I have my breakers off, but if they were on, I should be able to check up here, and it would be 34 volts going into our charge controller. So that has everything hooked up now. We'll put our batteries back in here, and we'll go ahead and hook our sensor up. We have a bracket made for our sensor, so we still have to mount it. So we'll mount the sensor. It'll come in this hole down here. I'll show you where that is. This hole here will be the sensor. This is coming from our linear actuator. So that's controlling our linear actuator, and of course our charge controller. So we'll go ahead and get the sensor bracket hooked up and get it wired in. Now it'll come up here and it'll wire into the top up here to the solar tracker controller. And I've got the power off on it still. I still have to put a fuse in here. Once I put a fuse in here, hook my batteries up to the charge controller, then our solar tracker controller will work. So let me get the camera and I'll show you how I have our wires ran and how I have them connected to the solar panel. Okay, you can see our wires coming out there. I have them zip tied. I need to tidy this up. Have them zip tied there. I ran up and connected to each one of the solar panels. And I have them zip tied. You can see they're zip tied just loosely right here. And the reason I leave these loose is so that way when the tracker tracks back across the sun, that these wires have plenty of room to flex back and forth. You know, because your panels are going to be moving, so these wires need to be able to move and need to be able to flex. So you can see here's one connection, there's our other, and then the third one's right here. So that shows all three of them connected to the solar panels. Then they come down and come in to your combiner box. So now we need to get our bracket mounted for the sensor, for the controller, wire it in, and we'll be ready to test. Everything should be working. Okay, now we have our light sensor, which comes in here, comes up and around, red, green, and yellow, wired in. Now let me grab the camera and I'll show you where I mounted it. Okay, there's the sensor. I just took a little aluminum bracket, a little piece of aluminum channel, mounted it to it. Wire comes in and under, comes down, and comes in right there at the bottom. There we go. Alright, it's moving. Okay, looks like it's working. Alright, seems like it's working fine. There, it kicked on again. If you have any questions or comments about this build, please leave them below. And as always, thanks for watching. That's sweet.